I am what I am. I am my own special creation. So come take a look. Give me the hook or the ovation. It's my world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
Good afternoon and welcome to LGBT Life. I'm your host Mick FitzGerald, and today our very special guest is Ciarán McKinney from Age and Opportunity, and I'm calling this Age and Opportunity Meets an Aging Opportunist. So Ciarán, welcome to Dublin City.
Thanks, Mick.
Yeah. Ciarán, it's not every week we actually get to have a living treasure on the programme, and I was there at this year's Pride when essentially your great work in the LGBT community was actually acknowledged. How did you feel when that happened? Because the photograph, you look very humble and to a certain degree almost overawed.
Well, I'm not really sure what you're talking about because we were there honouring Mick Quinlan for all of his work.
Yes, but you were there as well. And as I say, I thought, yes, you were there as a living treasure.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been amazing to witness the changes that have happened in Ireland since the late 70s and 80s, and to have been part of that. And I say just a small part because I spent more than 20 years living away while colleagues who remained here continued and persevered with the whole campaign for justice, with the formation of Glen and then other organisations coming on board, like of course, well, the what had been the National Gay Federation and its various permutations, and then obviously culminating in the Yes Equality campaign and the successful outcome of the referendum. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah. Growing up LGBT in Dublin, what was it like? Was that essentially in the 70s?
Well, I did my Leaving Cert in 76, and so I was in college then from around 78, and I suppose for me the biggest issue about discovering I was gay was that I was also very, very devout, so that was a personal huge challenge for me. But I came out while I was at college, and I became the auditor of the Gay Society at UCD, which in those days didn't receive capitation funding. And then from there I went to Trinity, where I became the auditor again of the Gay Soc. And my mission then was to actually create opportunities for people to have fun and to create a positive outlook on being gay. So the Gay Soc Irish Coffee Afternoons became legendary, and it was literally so that we could create a safe space for people. But I was thinking, well, just because you're gay doesn't mean you want to sit around and be bored to death with some kind of lobbying type, political type thing. That's not everybody's cup of tea. And although I was very much interested in that, and I was a member of the Lesbian and Gay Collective at the time, I didn't think that was necessarily the way forward for younger people in college. So we had loads of social events, and we had a great time.
Yeah. Just stepping back slightly, I mean, I've said it as many times on this programme. When I was in school in the 60s, I mean, I did my leaving, roughly speaking, about 10 years before you. I would have said there was nobody in that class that was gay, and then I used to joke and say, I wonder who the others were. What was it like when you were growing up? Was it seriously suppressed in that regard, it just wasn't even discussed?
I think it wasn't discussed. I mean, when I think about it, I would particularly kind of close friendship with about 4 or 5 guys, some of them in primary and then the rest of them through the secondary school, because I went to the same school for those 10 years. And nearly every one of us came out after we did our Leaving Certs, and I'm in touch with some of the guys sporadically, but it was never anything we talked about in school ever, and yet there were a group of us in school passing the Querelle of Brest, the Jean Genet novel, under the desks, and I mean, if we'd been caught reading that, we'd have been expelled.
We'll come back to that one in a second.
Yeah.
No, it's again, and the one that I always find interesting is how people dealt with sport. Now, you said to me you went to Sing Street. In my experience, Sing Street wasn't a particularly sporty school. It was an academic school. But I had my former schoolmate Claire Farrell on here a couple of weeks ago, and Claire and I went to the same school. Claire was a bit older, but Claire was saying to me at the time, she put in that extra effort, to be seen as sporty, to fit in. How did you deal with that?
Well, I mean, I've never ever had even any interest in sports, so I managed to avoid it like the plague. And because I was in the A stream as well, I think there was a greater tolerance for that. So. And I also, like, my dad went down to the school one day and said, look, it's not that he's doing nothing, he's up hiking and camping and stuff like that. And I nominally did some horse riding, but that was just a very convenient excuse to say I did something. And, but it was, I had absolutely zero interest in any of that. Whereas some of my friends were totally into sports, and they still are, and they're gay, but... I had no interest whatsoever, and I think I would have freaked at the idea of...
They never made you feel any way less for not doing it, because at the school I went to, you passed by the Fairview Park, there was one pitch that was allocated, and they called it the Cripple's Acre. Lovely name, wasn't it? And people used to literally just walk up and down. They would, from one end of the year to the other, their boots might get a bit dirty, but their jerseys and their shorts never got a stain. And there was a football in the middle, and that's all they did. They walked up and down, and it was almost like they were social lepers in that regard. And I always thought, that's not something I'm comfortable with, even though I was very keen on sport.
Well, I mean, we used to get a half day on Wednesdays, which was nominally to do sports, and I'd just go home and watch The Saint, and stuff, and whatever. I mean, I got away with it, and ironically, in 6th class primary, somebody introduced basketball, and I absolutely adored it, but then it wasn't available in secondary school. I think had that been around, I'd have done that, So,
looking back, and you talk about the mid-70s as the time culturally that you probably became aware of being LGBT. Now, by that stage, I would have said, well, we had given you a certain legacy. My generation, we'd given you David Bowie, we'd given you Lou Reed, we'd given you a few things along the way. My memory of that period, because we never had, there was no such thing as homosexuality in Ireland. There was certainly no such thing as gay. There was only queer. And queer was isolation. Queer was people who exploited. It was Christian Brothers, it was Scoutmasters, it was a whole range of things. And it was a very, very bad model for what is now seen as a very respectable lifestyle in that regard. Was that your experience at all?
It was more mixed than that, because, and I agree with you with the negative role modelling and stuff, except remember, we also had our own gay royal family. We had Micheál Mac Liammóir and Hilton Edwards.
Of course, yes.
And there were other, I suppose, larger-than-life characters whose lifestyles were not questioned in the same way, and so, and everybody knew that they were a couple. And I remember distinctly Hilton Edwards' funeral, and Micheál, or maybe it was Micheál Mac Liammór's funeral. Anyway, the survivor being treated, just like the grieving partner that he was, and it being completely about that person, the person who survived. But certainly in terms of like cultural references, in terms of telly and stuff, there were just really a few quite gay, camp, limp-wristed characters. Yeah. And I guess for me, what really helped me was literature, and then coming across the mainly North American, like self-aware gay fiction stories, really great stories about gay men. Reading James Baldwin, reading various other writers, The Boy's Own Story, Edmund White, people like that, and thinking, okay, there really is something positive. There's something that can be really joyful just to be reading, as well as fantasizing about it and thinking, well, that could be my life too.
It's interesting you should say that, and we'll go back to Jean Genet. I first came across gay literature. I say my father was a huge influence on me, but it was mainly because he brought the books into the house. And what I noticed from about 1960s, about 67, 68, we had all these good literature. We had George Orwell, we had a lot of the moderns. Suddenly, the work started to change, and out of the blue, in came James Baldwin, in came Jean Genet, in came William Burroughs. Now, at the time, I thought, well, fine. So, in essence, that was my literary introduction. Looking back on my father now, that's part of my contribution to the Edmund Lynch documentary that we're both part of. How important then was literature in that regard to showing you that there was a world out there?
I think it would be difficult to overestimate the importance of literature and other cultural signifiers. And so, for instance, I remember one time coming back to Ireland, I was living in London, and seeing those huge billboards, get over it, it's a gay thing, and the two hurling players kissing and stuff, and thinking, oh my God, that's just amazing. And so I think anything that can be part of declaring visibility, promoting visibility, reminding people that there are other ways to live their lives and that are authentic, I think that's really important. And I think the arts and culture in general has an enormous role to play in that. You know, just as, for instance, where I work at the moment, one of our key initiatives is really to help people understand in a more accurate way what it is to be older in Ireland, to challenge ageism, to challenge the stereotypical ideas that people have about older people. And then as part of that, of course, we then also commissioned a study on older LGBT people in 20, which was published in 2011. And that was really to examine the lived lives in Ireland of older LGBT people then. Yeah, and I don't think, you know, I think really what we have is an information vacuum very often, and so we need to just remind people that you know, that we're here.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. If I was to put one single cultural event, and people may argue whether it's cultural or not, that was an eye-opener for me, it was the Lou Reed album, Transformer. I mean, that did not exist in Ireland. You know, what Lou was talking about wasn't people in pantomimes. He was talking about a very different world, but it was a world that I could relate to because it was a world of rock and roll. And you would have been much younger when that came out. Do you recall it?
Yeah, and also I was particularly lazy around music, to be perfectly honest. So
you never wanted to be David Bowie.
No, never. You know, but like, I mean, I hung around like kind of the city centre scene. So I guess film and theatre were really important as well. You know, and like I remember like even things like when the Project Arts put on Bent. Or people like the Dice Man, you know, and Tom in his various manifestations and stuff, and you know, challenging people's perceptions and stuff. And I think that was really, really, really important. I think Tom McGinty died about 21 years ago now.
He did. It would have been about 95 or thereabouts. I had just come back from Australia at the time.
But so, like, I guess, you know, there were things like, I mean, I can't remember exactly when the Hirschfeld Centre opened, but I think it was in the early 80s. And, you know, having a place where you could go and listen, like a fantastic club. They also had a place where you could eat. There was the members' private cinema. So, I mean, most of the art house films I ever saw were there, as opposed to the film club around at Brailsford Terrace.
Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, they were all part of creating a sense of community and a sense of growing pride, I guess, and promoting a growing sense of confidence. And yet at that time I was also one of those people who was standing outside the club at night giving guys cards with what to do if you're stopped by the guards, because gay sex was still illegal in those days. And so for me it was an incredible journey to then have the Minister of Justice, as he was then, Michael McDowell, launching, you know, the Garda LGBT community safety policy in Outhouse, you know, in 2005, I think it was, and just, you know, and that was part of a journey that the Garda Síochána has been going on for quite a number of years, and you saw that at the launch of Dublin Pride, we welcomed Finbar Murphy up to thank him for all of that work. So, you know, there have been all kinds of players involved in bringing Ireland to where it is now. You know.
It's an interesting one. Coming back to that one there, Ciarán, I mean, I go back to the late 60s when, you know, the word or the phrase that sums up our lifestyle was sex and drugs and rock and roll. So when I saw you praising Sergeant Finbar Murphy at the time, that did not gel with me, because in my day, you ran from the police.
Absolutely.
And quite literally, as I've said on this programme, if you were even just a pot smoker, you weren't going to put your hand up and say, I'm also gay, to give people another reason to arrest you. So can you just share with listeners, to a certain degree, how did that if you like, what I would call a symbiotic relationship with the Gardaí arise? Was it simply because of the personalities involved?
Well, I mean, I wasn't here for the beginning of that, so I inherited that role when I started working at Glen, and but I became the person or one of the people involved in the community Garda community policing initiatives. I think Finbar Murphy himself was incredibly brave, but he was also supported at senior level in what he was trying to do. And I honestly believe that there's also been a growing sense of awakening and awareness of minority rights throughout that whole organisation. And so, along with Glenn and other people, we embarked on a programme of LGBT awareness with the Gardaí. And, you know, my experience was we were always positively received.
Okay, yeah. On a societal level, then, how do you explain that? If you go back to 1968, 69, sex and drugs were both equally, shall we say, condemned. Sex suddenly became respectable. Drugs isn't really. In fact, if anything, drugs is even less respectable back now than it was back then. How do you, shall we say, account for that change in Irish thinking?
Well, I would blame Gay Byrne. So, and I'm joking only slightly. I think programs like, you know, the Late Late Show and indeed Gay Byrne's radio shows as well were hugely important in you know, chipping away and changing Irish society. I mean, the joke was we didn't have sex before the Late Late Show, and of course, but what we didn't really have was a whole population with a sense of literacy around talking about sex or an acceptability about talking about, you know, either, you know, intimate moments or indeed not so intimate, but you know, other aspects of both sexuality and sexual orientation, and really extraordinarily brave people like David Norris, like other people who have really, in fact, put their what should be a private part of your life, if you want it to remain private, and having that open to be picked at by naysayers and stuff. And you know, so there's a legacy left behind by a whole group of people who've been hugely dedicated, like, you know, all of the campaigners in Glen over the years, Chris Robson, Bill Foley, you know, and then sort of the next generation, Brian Sheehan and various people, Carl Hayden and others, and then Gráinne Healy, and you know, and indeed in fact the growing visibility of lesbians as well has been hugely important, and Alva Smith has been a very important part of that too. And reminding people that it isn't just about gay men, that you know, that we are a whole population of both people with either sexual orientations or indeed gender identities. And what I love about Ireland is that I think at last we're beginning to develop some kind of fluency and awareness about trans issues as well, which is great. Yeah,
it's interesting you should say that, because when we talk about things, we seem to solve problems when we suppress them.
Yeah.
The case I would point to, the case in point I would point to is Gerry Ryan. If Gerry Ryan had been a gay man and said, "Hello, I'm gay," everybody said, "Well done, Gerry, what a wonderful person." Half the town knew what Gerry was up to. Gerry was going on radio saying, "Oh, this is terrible." Would he still perhaps be alive if we had have had that conversation? I'm just wondering, in that sense of the word, that it's now acceptable for people to say, "Yes, I am this and that and the other." It's not acceptable for somebody in the media to turn around and say, "This is what I actually do at home."
Well, I mean, I don't really have an opinion on that particularly. I certainly don't have an opinion on Gerry Ryan, because I just don't know anything about him particularly at all. But I think anybody in public life needs to have a think about how much of their persona that they want to reveal. Well, what I guess is, I think, really important is to avoid being a hypocrite. So people like Father Michael Cleary, you know, berating people about, you know, Catholic sexual teachings and stuff, and at the same time it then being discovered that he was in a relationship with a woman and had fathered kids. Now that level of hypocrisy is disgusting. So what I would really hope for is that that we're en route to a society where we can actually just be more open and be more truly ourselves and be authentic.
Yeah. You and I, we go back a long way, and we've probably, you know, experiences that the current generation, many of them wouldn't have. And it's interesting. I think there are two schools of thought about, should we be bringing some of these things up? Should we be, you know, in essence, familiarising people with the LGBT history that they haven't experienced? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, I do. I mean, I suppose when I think about it, if we even think about the position of women in Irish society these days, which I think has certainly began to improve dramatically when we joined the EU. But, you know, we can't just then forget what the position for women was like in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and the the really important strides that were taken by numerous women, and often to great personal cost. And I think it's the same for the LGBT and T communities, that while I truly don't believe that younger generations owe any of us from the older generations. I don't think they owe us anything. But I think a sense of awareness about where we've come from is always useful. And the fact that these days it is easier, I'm not saying it's totally easy, but it's much easier to consider our sexual orientation, our identities, who we are, is down to the actions of so many people, many of whom are still invisible, but people who are doing really important work in the background. And I used to have a saying years ago, which was, the way to change the world is to go to the meetings and to write the minutes, and that can feel terribly mundane, but actually that can be a really important part about bringing change.
But no, it's you and I, we went to Pride this year. We both, and to me, that was a fulfillment of a certain leg of a particular journey. How comfortable are you with the legacy that we are now bequeathing to the next generation?
Well, I'm quite comfortable, but if you think about, because we had talked about earlier about also talking about this report, Visible Lives.
Yes.
I think what you can find from that is that there are older LGBT people in Ireland who are still relatively fearful about the future. In particular, a sense that perhaps medical and healthcare practitioners don't really understand our lives. And I think the finding was that only a third of the respondents felt that there was sufficient knowledge among healthcare providers. And for me, the other key concern is that people are also very, very, very anxious about if they have to go into residential care. That now, I would say firstly that if you go into residential care, everybody loses their sexuality, But I think there's also something about perhaps losing your identity as well, your sexual orientation, and an acknowledgement of who you've been all your life. And that, to my mind, is of great concern for people, and we need to be ensuring that is no longer the case. Now, I do think there's going to be people like me and my friends who are not going back into the closet for anybody, and so we will bring about that change as we go forward in our lives. But I do also worry about a whole population of LGBT older person who may well not have that degree of confidence, and who may well, in some cases, will have led a relatively closeted life all their lives, and then really looking at a relatively bleak prospect if they have to go into residential care.
So when I originally interviewed Professor Agnes Higgins from Trinity College about this particular report, what struck me about the report is that as we age, and it's 5 years ago we did this, our sexuality, whether it's orientation or practice even, tends to get diminished as we go along. And what I said to Professor Higgins at the time is that the distinction between an LGBT person who's, say, 65 and a non-LGBT person is it's actually not that great. How do you feel about that?
I think we've got to acknowledge that firstly, sex doesn't stop when you hit 50 or hit 60, and that we need to be encouraging people to talk about that.
Yes.
I think that, for instance, for many older people, and if something like sexual desire or physical expression of that becomes a problem, it may well be that there's an underlying medical problem that can be treated, but that can only be treated if it's acknowledged and spoken to, like to your doctor. And so I would encourage anybody to raise those concerns with their GP for a start. But then secondly, I think also we need to acknowledge that older people in general many older people in general continue to have very, healthy sex lives, whether that's in an opposite sex relationship or a same sex relationship. And we should really just, be accepting of that, but I really do think we need to destigmatize that whole concept of sex in older age, because what that can lead to is a lack of fulfillment and a feeling like, that's like, what a first world problem, and in fact it's not. Our sexuality is an integral part of our being.
Question I asked Agnes Higgins at the time, and it was one of the controversial ones I put to her. I said, does the LGBT community need to reform itself to a certain degree? Because what they were saying at the time, what I was saying was that LGBT seemed to be much more youth orientated. So if you were somebody who was 50 or 60, and I can remember about 15 years ago going into a club, and as we were going up behind these twinks, they were saying, "Oh, look, here's the pensioners." Now I was much younger then. Is there a need for some form of reform there, or will that naturally take its course as we become more regularised?
I suppose I think it depends on what you mean by the community, because what you're describing is one particular commercial expression of that, and so for most of us that's going to be a minority expression as we get older anyway, because most older people often find that they no longer go clubbing as much as they used to, you know. But then go to a Leonard Cohen concert and, you know, you're surrounded by people our age and also younger people. So, but I mean, you know, one of my colleagues was talking about how she intends to, you know, retire disgracefully, and I would just encourage that, and I think we need to be claiming our space in commercial venues as well. Yeah.
Well, then that goes back to something you were involved in with the Older and Bolder, and I remember when that came out, and I thought, you really don't have people like me in mind for that one. And that's exactly my point, is that I don't feel like becoming part of the Paul McCartney song, you know, grandchildren on my knee and give me a bottle of wine sort of thing. I still want to, I don't necessarily want to go to clubs, but I don't want to actually have to suddenly give up all the things that I have enjoyed for the last 40 years. Is there a space for that?
I would hope there is. I'm not entirely sure which Older and Bolder campaign you're talking about, because
I mean, that's the general term.
Oh, okay. But certainly, I think, you know, I do think that what we are currently witnessing is a population of older people who aren't living to the stereotypes of previous older generations. I fully applaud the ski holidays, you know, spending the kids' inheritance type holiday, you know, and I think older people should just do that.
Ciarán, we're maybe not Leonard Cohen, but we're probably going to end up at a few more places again. So, Ciarán McKinney, it has been a delight to talk to you.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you.
That's it for this week's LGBT Life. We'll be back next week with Senator Gillian Van Turnout, but in the meantime... Gotta get up, gotta get up, gotta get up.